Hey, now we are live. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the day one of the TestMu Conference 2024. I'm Sriharsha, your host for this session, and I'm thrilled to have you with us today. Choosing the right tool for web testing can feel like navigating a maze. So, is Selenium the perfect guide, or are there any better options? Here to help us to answer this question, we have Diego Molina. Diego is a software engineer who is fascinated by testing. He is one of the project leads at the Selenium project. He can often be spotted speaking at the Selenium APM and testing conferences, and most of the time, you can find him on the Slack channel. Currently, he is working at Sauce Labs as a staff software engineer. So get ready for the session, choosing the right framework, exploring the Selenium ecosystem for testing. That might change how you think about Selenium. So let's get started. Over to you, Diego.
Thank you, Sri. Thank you very much. Let me share my screen. Hi, everyone. Thank you for being here. I know it's late for some of you. It's also early for some of you. So I'm really glad to have you here. So let me get started. Right. So Sri already mentioned that. I'm Diego. I've been working in Selenium for a few years already. I'm also part of the sauce team doing open source over there. And if you want to reach out to me, if you have questions or I don't know, anything that comes to your head that you think I might be a good person to help, that's my LinkedIn and my Twitter, formerly, so now X, formerly Twitter accounts. Yeah, so um, let's start with the overview of the presentation. I want to share with you some thoughts about if Selenium is a good option or not. And then just want to jump into the conversation about testing frameworks, because based on that, we can see what alternatives we have out there and some takeaways at the end. So the icebreaker of this presentation is this question: like, should you choose Selenium for your browser automation and testing efforts, right? So when you start Googling and you ask maybe ChatGPT or another tool that can give you more concise answers, you usually get around this type of bullet points because it's a good solution because you have like cross-browser, cross-platform support. It actually tests real browsers. It's a standard, so it works very closely in every single browser in the same way. You can have a local, a remote execution, and most importantly, it has an extreme wide community support, and it's created by the community for the community. But then you start thinking about the downsides of choosing a tool like Selenium, right? Um, there is no automatic weighting, so you have to write down all your weights, your synchronization code to figure out how the test can actually be more usable for your website. There is no reporting. You have to write a lot of code to make things work. There are no assertions. And the reason for that is that Selenium is not a testing framework, right? That has been one of the mistakes we have done at the Selenium team. We never mentioned that Selenium was not a testing framework, and therefore people just went with it. People just tried to use it as a testing framework, and they were finding out along the way that many things were missing. You didn't have a reporting tool, you didn't have an assertion library, so you had to start building all these things uh, from scratch because Selenium is a low-level browser automation tool. It's a tool that is very good at driving the browser. It's a tool that is excellent at clicking, at typing, at telling you if an element is in the screen or not. But it's not a good tool to actually test a website because it doesn't really know how to assert something. It doesn't really know how to give a good report when you have a situation where you want to explore if a bug is real or not. It doesn't have automatic weighting. Well, it has implicit weighting, but I hope we all know the issues with implicit weighting. And that's why there is a wide conversation out there that people who understand testing tools, automation tools, feel that is a bit um, unfair because you cannot compare Selenium with Playwright, with Cypress, well, a bit with Puppeteer, but you cannot compare it with Playwright and Cypress because Playwright and Cypress are complete testing tools and Selenium is just an automation library. To give you all the context that I want to share when we talk about testing frameworks, I want to go through this blog post the DevTools team from Google did about 1 year ago. Um, the DevTools team at Google have been working very intensively in the BiDi WebDriver standard. And they are giving us the context of where we started many years ago, around 20 years ago, how it has evolved along all those years, and where we are now, and where we're moving in a few years. So you don't have to read the blog post, I will describe it for you. In 2004, Jason Huggins created Selenium with the idea of automating websites by injecting JavaScript inside the browser. And that basically meant that your test was running inside the browser along your web application, which is kind of the same approach you have today with Cypress and in some cases with Testcafe. A long time people saw, okay, this is not the best approach because I cannot inject code into my web application to make it testable, because somehow it jumps into the event loop that the browser has, and therefore my web application is not behaving as a regular user would use it. One of the persons who noticed that was Simon Stewart, and therefore he created WebDriver. An interesting point here is that Selenium was one project and WebDriver was a different project. They were competing projects, and they found out that Selenium was a tool that had really good approaches, but had some downsides. And WebDriver, same story, some good approaches and some downsides. They merged them, and that's how we got Selenium WebDriver. So competing tools can actually open their doors, come together, talk to each other, and offer a better solution for the community. That evolution brought the ground base for what it's called today the WebDriver W3C standard, which we call WebDriver Classic. All that synergy created something we call the WebDriver ecosystem. So this standard is just text written in some GitHub repository that describes how a browser should click, how browsers should find an element, and so on. And then, based on that description, you can do an implementation. So Chrome driver has an implementation of WebDriver, Gecko driver as well, Safari driver, and so on. Implementation on the client side is something that is happening, and that's the foundation of the WebDriver ecosystem. So the most famous implementation of WebDriver is Selenium. And on top of Selenium, there are many other projects that enrich this browser automation tool. For example, Appium is an extension of Selenium that helps you automate mobile devices, right? But you also have things like Water, that is a testing framework for Ruby. You have Selenite, which is a great tool to automate using Java, and it has like a reporting, it has assertions, and etc., etc. And that's how the WebDriver ecosystem got created. The thing is that Selenium is not the only implementation that WebDriver has. There is also WebDriver IO, which is a great implementation for WebDriver, but that is also a testing framework because it has assertions built in, it has a bunch of reporting plugins, it has integration with cloud vendors, and it's a great tool to get started with testing. Interestingly, there is something on top called Serenity.js, and Serenity.js lets you write a test, and the test is agnostic from the tool being used to automate the browser. So you could tell Serenity.js to run this test with Selenium or with WebDriver IO or with Puppeteer or with Playwright, and that's a very cool approach. So the important thing here is that working together between different projects creates an ecosystem where the community profits. Also, PHP is a big fan of this implementation because 80% of the web is still written in PHP. So we have the implementation of WebDriver in PHP that was originally made by Facebook, then open sourced it and released it to someone else. And on top of that implementation, we have Laravel Dusk and Panther, that those are two testing frameworks in PHP. The thing is that this is how Selenium evolved, right? But along those years, we have JavaScript. For some reason, JavaScript was chosen as the tool that was going to be used to build the web. Then we had Web.io, Appium. We have also Protractor that is currently deprecated. And a small parenthesis here, that is my fear with tools like Cypress and Playwright, because they are owned by companies. It's very hard to actually contribute to them and to make them open to the community in terms of roadmap and bug fixing and things like that. Google decided that Protractor was not going to move forward, and they basically deprecated the tool, and a lot of people had to find a replacement. I hope that in the future, folks in Cypress and Playwright collaborate with the community and avoid those scenarios to happen. Closing the parentheses. So yeah, JavaScript grew. Many testing frameworks were created, like Puppeteer, Cypress, and Playwright. And that brings us to the point of different automation approaches. In general, we have two approaches. One is the high level, which uses the web APIs and Node.js processes, and the low level approach, which uses WebDriver and CDP. If we talk about Cypress, it uses a high level approach because what it does when you run a test is that Cypress starts a proxy, a Node.js process that is hooked into the browser, and together with that is able to communicate to the internet. So your website is passing through that proxy, but also all your test code is running inside the same browser. And one of the things there is that it's there are some limitations because your test is running in the same event loop the browser application, so the web application is running. And what happens is that you get the perception that this is less flaky, but basically because your test is in the middle of the execution of your web application. There is a queue of events, and only one can be executed at the same time. And most of the time, you cannot determine the order of those execution. And then if you are testing your website, then your web application has to halt at a moment to let that execution happen. So that's why you get the impression that this is less flaky, but in the end, your end user is not actually injecting JavaScript to the browser. So that's the difference between this high-level approach that tries to insert the test inside the browser, but it has these downsides that your actual user doesn't do that, right? And it kind of makes your application more stable, but in the end, it's kind of faking that for you. However, it might be cool to test something like Storybook. There might be use cases where Cypress is very good, but my preference is to avoid high-level tools. It's a very similar story as Testcafe. They also have a reverse proxy in the middle. And small parenthesis, they actually evolved the tool to have a mixed approach. Low level, if you're using Chromium browsers, so Chromium-based browsers, they use CDP. But if you are using something that is not Chromium-based, like Firefox or Safari, they use this reverse proxy that has a very similar approach to Cypress. So these are both good tools because they have a bunch of features that help you test a website in a good way. But in some way, they are not. In the case of Testcafe, it's a smaller ecosystem. There might be a performance overhead due to the proxy being part of the execution in the Node.js process. In the case of Cypress, well, there is a limitation in the browsers. It cannot test Safari, for example, but it might be really good for some use cases like Storybook or testing components, for example. Then let's jump into the bigger part of this presentation, which is, WebDriver, the classic approach that we all have with Selenium versus CDP. So the WebDriver classic approach is an approach that you have your test code. It starts a browser driver like Chrome driver, 𝐃𝐢𝐞𝐠𝐨 driver, and so on. And that is the component that drives the browser from outside. This is the difference between this high-level approach and the low-level approach. And if you talk about CDP, basically your test code is talking directly to the browser via WebSockets and using the Chrome DevTools protocol. There is a lot of detail there that I'm omitting, like, it's a debugging protocol, it's very verbose, but also gives you more features that you can use to get inside the browser and understand how your web application is working. For example, intercept the network, mock the geolocation, and so on. So these are the two big approaches these days. If we talk about low-level controls, then we have this, because today we have all these modern web frameworks that they might make the application look good, but there might be getting errors in the backend, or they might be getting errors in the console. So that's why it's important that today we're able to actually query the console, query the error logs in the browser to understand if the application is working well, not only on the presentation layer, but also in the internals of the process, the Node.js process. And at the same time, we want to do things like intercept the network requests. Maybe we want to mock an API. Maybe we want to avoid Google Analytics for our tests. Maybe we want to test a responsive mode, like see how the website would look in a smaller screen, if you want to test some accessibility options in that way. And, there are many things that you could do with those low-level controls. So what's the point here? That we have an approach that has been working for several years, but is getting out of date, which is this classic WebDriver approach, and this CDP that opens the door to many things, which is basically what Playwright is doing. And the idea is that we have something called WebDriver by die. The gist of it is that what if we could have something like CDP, a bit more organized, a bit more clean, made for browser automation? And that's what Apple, Google, Microsoft, and Mozilla are doing together as a team with the Selenium project, with the folks from Web.io. And they're working to have a standard that works very similarly to CDP, but standardized across browser. The Chrome DevTools team, these folks are really pushing that, and they actually are moving extremely fast. They have been helping us with sharing this content, and basically they are selling this as, it's possible now to use any automation tool and make it cross-browser. And the example they give us is that Puppeteer is now a cross-browser tool because they can do Chromium-based browsers and Firefox. And whenever Safari is ready, then Puppeteer will be able to drive Safari as well. And this brings us to the next point. We had the WebDriver by die, the WebDriver ecosystem, and now we have the WebDriver by die ecosystem. If you note, around the middle of the side, around the mid part of the slide on the right, we have a new member of the by die ecosystem, which is Puppeteer. And the question here is like, who would have thought years ago that Puppeteer, that was so independent from all the standardization, that was so independent from all the things that were happening along the other browsers, was going to be here collaborating with us? So one of our predictions in this working group is that eventually Playwright will see a lot of benefit from different features that are offered in the by die implementation, and they will eventually move here as well. Because, for example, Playwright has to recompile Firefox and put CDP on top. Playwright has to recompile WebKit and put CDP on top. And all that work is really a heavy load when you have to do that in every single release. So eventually, our thought is that we can, join forces, work together, and make this a better tool for the whole community. So having, all this context, I just want to get into the conversation of like, so why do we choose a framework, right? What's the idea behind choosing a framework? Because we want to reduce our costs, our development costs. We want to be faster. Imagine if you are implementing your own framework, right? And you leave it there and somehow BiDi is out. Then you have to rework it from scratch to make it work with the new standard. But if you base yourself on a framework that is working out there, eventually you will get those updates for you, and that makes you more reactive to changes that are happening in the browser ecosystem. And usually, when we want to choose a framework, we want to have a bunch of tools that are helping us focus on writing a good test and not making us focus on writing helper code to make our test work. So, for example, we want to have an assertion library. We want to have a way to configure which browsers we want to run tests. We want to have a way to, plug in cloud vendors. We want, for example, really good reporting. We want like screenshots out of the box, videos, and so on. So we want things that work out of the box, because our job as people who care about quality is to focus on the quality, not focus on building a tool that is going to help us bring quality. Um, and that actually helps you to be more productive and deliver more value to your team and company, and of course, customers. And you also consider, what programming language, like if the repository is active and all those things that you check in GitHub. But one of the things I want to highlight here is that you should also check the governance. By governance, I mean how open the project is to accept contributions for the community. Um, and that's why that's the only part I have an issue with Cypress and Playwright, because they are owned by a company. They have like their own agenda, and I just want to see a project that collaborates more with the community and is more open to be future proof. Like in the case something changes in a few years and Microsoft makes a decision about uh, not supporting Playwright anymore, that there is a way for the community to rescue that project. Like, for example, when Facebook created the PHP bindings for WebDriver, they created a way to rescue that project and bring it to the community so the community could keep using it. So that's my wish to those projects, that they find a way to open the door for the community to rescue them if something happens in their roadmap or plans. So yeah, keep an eye on the governance. And if you're using Playwright or Cypress, like poke them and tell them what's your long-term plan. Don't let us hanging if something goes wrong. So yeah, that's kind of a message here in terms of governance. So going back to the point of the alternatives out there, like we want to choose testing framework, right? Uh, And the alternatives I want to share here, they are mostly focused on the following ones. You want to have code that is readable. You want to stop writing code to make your testing code work. So you want to actually stop writing helper functions. You just want to write the test code. You want an assertion library. You want to have reports out of the box, and you want to have like guidelines on how to do testing in several and different scenarios. And super important, you want to have automatic waiting, like any of the cool tools out there you have. So these are tools built on top of Selenium or the WebDriver ecosystem, with exception of one. So I'm just going to make a small brief pass in this one, which is Selenite. It's a tool written on top of Selenium in Java that you can use to test browsers and mobile devices at the same time. So this embeds basically Selenium and Appium in one way, and it gives you a testing library, it gives you reporting, and many other things. So If you have used Java in Selenium, if you want to test a login on a website, you know that this is roughly 15 to 20 lines. But with Selenite, it's just 4 lines. Why? Because the configuration to test which browser is it, the options, is just a configuration file, or you can do it programmatically, but it has to be in a different place. So basically, your tests really focus on what you want to do. And I feel that somehow the API Selenite offers to you is more human readable. So you can understand things like set value. You have things like the assertions like should have and all those things. And that's a quite nice thing to have. You write less code because in Selenium you write these long expressions to find this selector. And in Selenite, you just write $sign H1. If you want to do an assertion and a wait for something that has to be there, then it's like WebDriver wait, and then put the seconds, and then put the component and the helper, and it's really a lot of code. And in Selenium, you just say this should be visible, period. And an error message in Selenium, you get all these huge struct traces. In Selenite, they're all wrapped for you to make something more understandable. It tells you what the error was, if there was an element, what the element was. It takes a screenshot for you and it saves the website as well. So this is super helpful because you're just writing 4 lines of code and then you get all of this out of the box. One of the cool things about Selenite is that if you write 10 tests, then you get 10 tests running in parallel. And this is very interesting because obviously Selenium doesn't have this out of the box. You have to plug in a test runner, you have to write down a configuration, like a bunch of things, right? But when you use something like Selenite, it just works out of the box. And it's about perception, right? Because I was watching a video where someone was reviewing Playwright versus, I think, WebDriver.io or something like that. And the biggest critic was that Playwright was faster because everything was taking less time, obviously. And the thing is that Playwright is very smart because they run everything in parallel, which I mean, this is what you want when you want to run automated tests. You want to run things as fast as possible. But in some other frameworks, that's not the default. And that's why sometimes people perceive, again, with some other little facts, that Playwright is faster. But then you have other frameworks that do the same, and you also perceive that they're faster. So most of the time, it's not only about being fast by default, but also being fast because there are some options that you can configure and you can tune to make your test suite faster. So it's important to understand what you're comparing when you're doing an evaluation of the framework. Yeah, and Selenium has mobile, which I already discussed. So let's jump to Python. If you want a Python framework that does everything for you, my recommendation is called Selenium Base. They have a visual testing tool. They have great reporting tools. They have a way to, configure different options to highlight the elements you are actually clicking. It's a great framework and it's really well maintained. So Michael Means is one of the persons who devotes most of his time to actually have this tool working well. So if you're a Python person, give it a try. Ruby with Water is another great option. The option I forgot to add here is Capybara as well. Two great frameworks that are very useful for Ruby. All-in-one assertion libraries, reporting tools, or plugins to do reporting, and so on. In JavaScript, I think one of the hidden gems in the WebDriver ecosystem is WebDriver.io. This tool has so many features. It has recently they added visual testing. They also have different integration with cloud vendors working out of the box. They also have things like CLI configuration that I recognize it could use some UX to make it more simple and not really like ask so many questions. But it works with mobile devices, it works with browsers, it works with Electron. So many things out of the box. You can test components. You can do so many things like Shadow DOM without piercing that implicitly, and they just released the version 9, which is actually more enhanced than ever. So I really recommend that you have a look at it, and it will give you the option to test websites with real browsers in the best way you can do these days. But I would need to be, blind to not recognize Playwright. I think it's good that Playwright is out there. It's a great tool for testing. The downside I have to say is they're not using the real browsers, the real Firefox and the real Safari. But it's a great option for people to get started into testing, because most of their methods, their APIs that they offer to write a test are very intuitive, and that's very good. And I personally have to thank them to be out there to offer this product, because it's giving us ideas in the Selenium project how to improve some things. And sometimes you can see things in both ways, like, oh, now we have a competitor, it's going to be annoying, it's going to be nasty. But I prefer to see things like, oh, there is a new tool that is pretty good. Maybe we can check what they do and we can learn from it, and we can copy things in Selenium and the WebDriver ecosystem. So in the end, it's not about like who's the best tool, or like who makes things better, but it's more about like collaboration. So we hope at some point in the WebDriver ecosystem is that we can collaborate, we can offer the Playwright users a way to test real browsers, and then everybody benefits in the end with all the types of things that we do in browser automation. Last but not least, C Sharp. For the folks who are using C Sharp, my recommendation is Atata. It's, again, a framework with everything inside it, assertions, reporting plugins, and so on. So please have a look if you are into C Sharp and you want to test web applications as well. Having said that, I'm going to start with my takeaways. I just wanted to, there are like 2 or 3 slides left, and I just want to leave enough time for questions, because this type of presentations bring a lot of comments and questions as well. Yeah, so my takeaways here for you are that ideally, if you want to choose a new framework because the current one is flaky, or you have a new greenfield project, like, try to do a complete framework evaluation. Try to write a login that works from end to end. Try to check what browsers your customers use and see if that fits the browsers your framework supports. And don't just like throw all eggs all at once. Like, choose a sub group of tests that you can implement in the new framework, try it out, and see if that actually works for you. Think also about the upcoming years. Like, do you think that your website will evolve to a mobile site? Do you think that eventually you will move to a, I don't know, like a native application, or this website will turn into, I don't know, some hybrid application? Maybe your website is built with Flutter, and then you have to actually test it with different approaches, because like it's compiling one way for web, and there is a different presentation for iOS and for Android. So also question what is the future of the web application, so you know what tools you can use in the future. And the key thing here is that please focus on what you have out there. Tools that are made for testing, tools that are ready for you to use, and focus on delivering value to your team, to your customer, to your company. And yeah, like, avoid reinventing the wheel, please. And I think that the final thought I have about this is that I wish to see in the upcoming years a framework that has Playwright's usability, but with the stability of the BiDi WebDriver standard. Yeah, I think that's what I had to say. And if you have any questions or comments, I'm here for you. I think we have at least 10 minutes or maybe 8 minutes of questions. So yeah, here for you. Thank you for being here. I'm all ears. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Diego. That was the insightful session. I'm sure everyone found it as fascinated as I did. So, I see WebDriver BiDi is the future of browser automation. So, how ready is Selenium BiDi support? So, can users start using it?
Should you reply that or should I do it?
Yeah. So how ready is Selenium for BiDi support? So can users start using it?
Yeah. Yes. The thing is that there is a specification written,
Mhm.
and Chrome has a bunch of implementation done already, Firefox as well. And now in Selenium, we have some part of that implementation, which is available in Java and JavaScript, most of it. But if you don't want to wait and you're a JavaScript person, for example, you can use WebDriver.io.
Mhm.
This tool has already most of the implementation of BiDi out there working for you, and you
Mhm.
can use that already. And the cool thing is that if you start using BiDi, this will be a future proof. So the code you're writing will be future proof because that is the future for the next, I don't know, 10 years or even more. And that's how web applications will work, or the web testing will work from now on.
Got it. So now we'll take a couple of questions from the Q&A session. So I'll pick the highest voted one. I'll show you on the stage. So what are the best practices for managing test data in test environments in Selenium-based framework? So this is like a Selenium-based question.
Yeah, I think that is not really a Selenium based question because, I mean, even if you use Playwright, if you use Cypress, um, it also depends on how your application works. I have been like I haven't been working actively on like testing an application for a couple of years, but when I was a full-time tester, it really depended on the application. So on my first job, we had APIs to create the data via an API and prepare the test data for the test before the test was executed. And when the test was done, we had APIs to clean up that data and basically leave the environment ready. So it really depends on what approach your web application is giving you. If the web application has it's not like an old application, not a monolith, and maybe has APIs, I would rely on that to create the test data. If the application is well isolated in a way that you can spin the web application and mock the APIs, then you have the opportunity to create a lot of JSON files with mock data and spin an API to replace that real API. So there are a lot of approaches that you can use depending on how your web application is used. So it doesn't really depend on Selenium. It could be Playwright, it could be Cypress. It depends mostly on your web application and all the systems connected to it.
Got it. Okay. So we'll pick another question. So what are some scenarios where using Selenium could lead to inefficiencies?
Yeah, for example, I think a common use case is where you're testing a flow. So let's say you have five tests, and the five tests are testing almost the same flow. The typical example is the user area of like you have to log in, then you have to go to the user area, maybe modify a detail, and then you would have to assert that the detail is actually stored in the database. And in the next test, you have to actually go do the same thing, but then, I don't know, change the status of the user to inactive and so on. So most of these tests have the same flow until the last step and then an assertion. So if you choose something like Selenium to spin a browser, go to the workflow, and then do a small different thing at the end, that's an ineffective use of a browser tool that spins a browser and does all that. The better approach is to do it once, and for the rest of them, find a way to create a session, maybe create do the login with an API and get the token back to actually go directly to the page you want to test. So like try to avoid doing the same thing in every single test because you are like retesting a lot of steps in all those different steps. Um, So in general, this applies to any type of browser testing framework that you're using. So try to just you know factor and use one single flow to test the whole thing, and then the rest you can maybe use APIs to jump ahead um, in the flow, I think.
Got it. Okay. So we will take another question. We have 5 minutes left. So, how do you recommend people upskill themselves to a point where they clearly understand the toolkit to make decisions for their respective teams?
Okay, let me read it again. Yeah, that's a very good question, because my perception is that in the last, maybe since 2019, 2020, the decisions we make about the tool to use is based on what we see on social media and marketing. So we tend to buy something, we tend to use a tool because we see a live stream and we do a very small demo and it works. And instead of like thinking about the tools, we are forgetting what we have been learning in the previous years. We have been forgetting that maybe if it's an API, we don't need like a full-fledged testing framework that can test browsers, APIs, and I don't know, like GraphQL API. So maybe we just need a tool that does the job pretty well. Um, so what I'm trying to say is that instead of choosing the tool first, try to think what the application does, what the scenario that you want to test is doing, and then focus on understanding how you would solve that problem, how you would test it. And when you have a solution on the understanding on how you can test that, then you will see that choosing the tool is just an afterthought. The typical example is, well, I just gave it. Like if it's an API, why would you need a full-fledged framework? So I think it's more like understanding what you have to test before choosing the tool to test. And this has to be an exercise the whole team does. So when I was like in a developing team, that's what we were doing. There was a feature, and then we were also part of the planning that we were deciding, okay, this feature is going to be like this, like that. We're going to have an endpoint. We're going to have a new screen. And then what we were doing is like, okay, how do we test this part? Okay, this will be an API test, and this is the tool we're using for API test. This part, okay, this is more like a message bus. That what we're going to do? We're going to have like some mock application that mocks the bus, and then we don't have to test the bus because this is already tested in a different place, and so on. So we were trying to deconstruct the scenario we had to test, and then finding tools for each part of it.
Okay, that was a great explanation, Diego. So we have a couple of minutes left. I think so. We can take one last question. So, can Selenium, as a low-level browser automation tool, work well with fully testing low-code or more complex browser-based apps?
As a low-level browser automation work well, the thing is that, yeah, so Selenium is a low-level automation, browser automation tool, because it's basically the primitives everyone uses to interact with the browser. Um, so when we're talking about low-level or low-code applications, these are, um, okay, I misunderstood the question. Thank you for putting back. Like, how could we test low-code or apps? So the thing there is that there are two aspects you want to test there.
Mhm.
One aspect is actually the web application to see if the application works well when you swipe, when you click, a regular web application. And the other part is that to actually how to test that the low code is creating what you would expect, right? And that part I don't have a concrete answer, to be honest. I don't have a concrete answer on like telling you that your low code app that is supposed to construct I don't know, an API integration with a website with a front end screen, how could you test that? Like probably you could like do some TDD. You could do like some write on tests with the approach that tells you this is how the application should behave, and then when the low code tools give you like apply to that. But it's just something I'm like thinking on the run. I don't have a good example on telling you how you could test a low code application, the output of it. So I'm sorry about that. I don't have a good answer for that.
Okay, Diego. Okay, we are close to the end of the session. Then, thank you, Diego, for taking time to answer all the questions. Then, that's a wrap. A massive thank you to Diego for sharing such valuable insights, and thank you all for participating so actively. So, enjoy the rest of the TestMu Conference 2024 and see you in the next sessions. Thank you. Thank you so much for everyone joining.
Thank you for the invitation.